Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, we've talked extensively about this Auburn program over the last couple of weeks, but a lot of our conversations have been surrounded around recruiting. Now, the boys are itching to talk about how this Auburn team is going to look in 2024, and I'll just start off with this. We've talked about it a lot. You look at programs from 2023 going into 2024, what team across the country is going to have a larger improvement, at least in my mind, than this Auburn program? You look at all the spots that they struggled with in 2023, which was a lot. It was a very big transition from Brian Harsin to Hugh Freeze. That being said, they addressed almost every single concern that you had on this Auburn roster in 2023. I look at this program in 2024 and say, I don't know if I'm picking them to win the SEC. This team's going to be a heck of a lot better than what we saw during the 2023 year. Now, if Auburn does reach their potential, they got to answer some of these questions. Want to go over the 5 biggest question marks we have for this Auburn program in 2024. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a special and massive shout out to the Auburn fans. And we talked a lot about this program and the amount of support the Auburn fans continue to show. All the War Eagles in the comment section. That stuff means the world to the boys. It's no secret. We love talking this program. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some of your biggest question marks for this Auburn program as well, heading into the fall. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into question number 1. And that is, what does this offense look like in 2024? There is reason to believe from multiple different angles that this Auburn offense is going to take a massive step in the right direction. But I specifically, kind of want to hone in on the explosive passing attack. When you look at this Auburn team last year, they were outside of the top 90, not only completion percentage, but yards per pass. And you look at this Auburn wide receiver room last year and say there just wasn't a guy that could threaten teams down the field, kind of be that true wide receiver one, give that Auburn pass catching room any sort of explosiveness. You look at this team heading into 2024, I think this wide receiver room went from, to be honest, one of the worst wide receiver rooms we saw in 2023 to probably one of the better wide receiver rooms we see in 2024. Can Auburn manufacture some explosive plays in the passing attack? At least in my mind, the biggest question for this Auburn program heading into 2024.
Yeah, I think the big thing you've kind of mentioned is like they went from having almost no guys who you could just reliably believe in to beat the guy across from him consistently. I think Keandre Lambert-Smith, to me, has shown, and he's obviously been an offense that has stymied his growth, but a guy who, when he's had good, solid play around him, he's played really, really good football. And then you obviously got to go to the true freshman next. Cam Coleman's already kind of showed it, dominant in that spring game, really good athlete out of high school, obviously. And then Perry Thompson coming in as well. I mean, you have guys who at least have the athletic and the trait potential to be those guys who can win their matchups more consistently than what they were able to do.
You have guys that opposing defenses need to respect. There wasn't a single wide receiver. I mean, the biggest threat in this Auburn passing attack last year was probably tight end Rivaldo Fairweather, who I think is a stud. I think he's one of the better tight ends in the SEC. But when your passing attack is going through the tight end, that probably tells you a little bit something about the wide receiver room. You talk about guys that can just win one-on-one. And Cam Coleman, it's a little bit of a projection. He's a true freshman. Dill, I'll say this. I feel pretty comfortable making that projection from what we saw from him at the high school level and obviously what you heard from the spring practices than what you saw in the spring game. Keandre Lambert-Smith, that's a true wide receiver one. This was one of the most underrated pickups that you saw. I mean, again, it probably would be playing in the NFL had he not been on the Penn State offense the last couple of years, bringing Robert Lewis from Georgia State. I look at this wide receiver room and say, now it's chock full with guys that can go and make plays for quarterback Peyton Thorne, which in my mind is another intriguing question mark. I think Peyton Thorne got a lot of flack in 2023, a lot of it probably being fair. There are a couple of reasons why Peyton Thorne can take a massive step. One, the wide receiver room we just talked about, it is significantly better. The last time you saw Peyton Thorne have a wide receiver room like this, Michigan State won 11-2, right? Guys like Jaden Reed, Keon Coleman, Peyton Thorne has shown that if you give him the talent, he can win you a lot of football games at a very high level. Us as Michigan fans certainly know that. Then you have him getting a full year in this Auburn offense, which again, he came in the summer of last year. It was a very quick transition for him. And then thirdly, Hugh Freeze. Sounds like he's going to have a little bit more fingerprints on the offense. There's so much tailwind regarding how this Auburn passing attack can look in 2024. Now, I think the second question we have, Dale, is this offensive line. I look at the offensive line and say, Percy Lewis, Dylan Wade, Connor Lew, that has the bones to be a very, very good left side of the offensive line.
In an offensive line, frankly, that you're getting some guys back. I mean, even last year, you saw some inconsistency, especially in the pass game. I mean, you saw most of the time they're physically able to move guys off the ball. That wasn't typically the problem. But again, working as a unit in pass protection, I think that was the issue you really saw at times, really kind of rear its ugly head. But you also got to kind of adjust for the fact that you pretty much had a whole new starting five of pretty much all transfers. Obviously, Connor Lew, a true freshman, come working in. But they really didn't have any guys who were ever really played with each other. I think, again, you kind of look at things that Auburn was going through last year and why there maybe were some of those growing pains. Again, obviously some issues at the quarterback spot. For a very similar reason, I think they had those issues with the offensive line where they just didn't play at all.
That's a really good point. And we've talked about this a lot. With the transfer portal being so active, there's not a lot of offensive lines that, kind of return the bulk of their unit. You look at Dylan Wade, Connor Lew, Jeremiah Wright, Miller. They all played a lot of football for Auburn in the 2023 year. So you have a little bit of consistency, but I think even more importantly, I think you get better at two spots as you bring in Percy Lewis, right? Percy Lewis, still, I think we're both very intrigued with him at left tackle. Not only can be a guy that just road grades with the frame that he has, but a solid athlete in pass protection. But then you get to kick Dylan Wade at to left guard, and that's just a better position for Dylan Wade. Dylan Wade was a solid left tackle for Auburn last year. He's going to be a better left guard. And so you look at that left side, say Percy Lewis, Dylan Wade, Connor Lew, has the bones to be one of the better offensive lines that we see in the SEC. I'm intrigued by the offensive line. Now, Dill, you go to the defensive side of the football, a pretty solid defense last year for Hugh Freeze. The biggest question mark that we have, and we've been pretty vocal about it, Hugh Freeze certainly agreed with us because he went out and got 4 guys in the transfer portal on the inside of the defensive line, is the depth and difference makers they have on the inside of the defensive line, right? Gage Keys, Trill Carter, you're bringing Phillip Bleedy and Isaiah Rakes in the spring. Those are 4 veteran interior defensive linemen that have played a lot of football. Now, I'm not necessarily sure if there is a top 100 NFL draft pick. I think Phillip Bleedy is probably the most talented out of that group. That being said, it's a deep defensive line that has a lot of experience. You all of a sudden, you feel a little bit better about the interior of this defensive line for Auburn heading into 2024.
And that's probably at the end of the day what they're going to need to rely on is being able to be deep, keep guys fresh. Because I'm kind of with you. That's the one answer. I don't know that I have as much hope, maybe let's say, as some of the other positions. Like I think there's a lot of reasons to be very optimistic about what getting better in the passing attack, getting better in the offensive line, and especially in pass protection. I think that interior defensive line, that's just a really hard position to go get really good players in the transfer portal. I think that was obviously proven this year with so many teams kind of needing that. I think as you kind of look at Auburn and how they're building their defensive line through the recruiting cycles, I think you expect it to be better in the future. But I think this year, they're going to have to kind of make it work with some guys who I don't think are going to be guys you'll typically be seeing for this Auburn
I'll
team.
say this. I like Hugh Freeze's approach in the portal. Like I think there were a lot of programs that just shelled out a lot of money for just one guy on the inside. Oh, we all have watched enough football to say having one difference maker on the inside of the defensive line is not enough. I'd rather have a deep defensive line than one just difference maker. And I think that was Auburn's approach. Instead of going out and getting, a Derek Carmen or a guy like Dominic Williams, let's go get 4 Trill Carters and just have a really deep rotation on the inside of the defensive line. Now, we mentioned that there might not be a difference maker, a game wrecker on the inside of the Auburn defensive line. At the edge spot, that is kind of where you're really excited, right? It starts with Jalen McLeod playing kind of that Bucky where his juice off the line of scrimmage. I mean, he led this team in quarterback hurries with 21. He showed, especially towards the end of the season, he's got a little bit of a different get off than a lot of teams in the SEC. I think you're looking at potentially an elite pass rusher there, but then you talk about Keldrick Falk, going into year 2, you could see a massive step in the right direction from him. And I'll say this, if he improves from his freshman year to his sophomore year, you're looking at a damn good football player. Then you sprinkle in Amaris Williams or Jamonta Waller. You might not have the true top-end talent on the inside of the defensive line. I look at the edge rusher spot and say this unit could be very, very good for Auburn in 2024.
And again, you kind of look, these are the younger guys that I think the talent level that's going to kind of be at where Auburn's going to be in the future, at least. I think the edge position resembles more what I kind of expect moving forward for this Auburn team. And I think that's kind of what you need, frankly, to be a real top end player, if you will, in the SEC and the national stage. You need guys who are going to go be first rounders. And you kind of look, Amaris Williams certainly has the traits to be that type of guy. I think Jalen McLeod is criminally slept on. Doesn't maybe have the height and the length that some people look for in terms of what edge rushers are, but as athletic as you'll see at that position, has a really good knack for rushing the passer, I think.
So all the nerds that just look at arm length and frame, they'll count out our guy Jalen McLeod. This dude's a gamer. And he is, again, one of the better pure pass rushers that I think you see in the SEC. Dill, we talk about it all the time. Rushing the passer, you look at every single defense that's won a national championship over the last couple of years, it starts with the pass rush, right? The Georgia Bulldogs, Michigan last year. If Auburn can have that elite pass rush, which, again, the numbers were solid for Auburn last year in the sack department, but you go back and watch the film, look at some of the numbers, and they're kind of relying on the linebackers, right? Eugene Asante or Austin Keys blitzing. I don't think Auburn's going to need to blitz as much because they have the guys up front that can make it happen. Last question we have, and that is just in the secondary. And it's not necessarily a question. I think on paper, there might be some people across the country that say, all right, you lose DJ James, you lose Pritchett, you lose Jalen Simpson. This is a secondary that loses a lot to the NFL. It's going to take a step back. And I think a lot of Auburn fans are sitting there and saying, all right, Kayan Lee played really, really good as a freshman. Keontae Scott coming back for another year, bounced in the portal for a second, but decided to come back. You had a guy in Jaron Thompson who I just love that ad from Texas, a veteran safety that's played so much football, can do so much in that back end. They lost some experience, but they brought some experience in with Jaron Thompson. I look at the secondary and say, yeah, I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be as good as it was last year, but I don't think it's going to take a step back like a lot of people are going to expect from this Auburn team.
No, I also think that secondary room is starting to be built into a unit that I think you just feel comfortable about reloading because they've been doing it now for a while, and there hasn't been the same amount of turnover there as you've seen on other points in Auburn's roster. So, again, had a lot of guys stay last year through the Hugh Freeze era. I think these young guys got a chance to learn under some really, really good players and develop really well. I mean, you saw Kayan Lee do it. You've seen a little bit of guys like Terrence Love even when they get their shots, like they play pretty solid football. So this to me isn't as big of a question, I don't think, as that interior defensive line, because I think you kind of you have a lot more answers to that kind of situation. As much as you don't have a ton of returning production maybe across the board, I think you kind of feel more comfortable with who these young guys are and how talented they are.
Agree with that. This Auburn team, it's going to be fun. I'm just really excited to see. And again, are they going to win the SEC in 2024? I wouldn't put my money on it, but you start looking at 2025 and 2026, that's where this team's going to get dangerous. And again, Hugh Freeze knows where it starts. It starts from the talent acquisition point. They've hammered the transfer portal. They've done a phenomenal job recruiting the high school ranks. And once they start turning the ship around, what's that mean for recruiting? When you start showing that this Auburn program's going back to where it belongs, that's when it really starts making that jump. Really excited about this program. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.